Hi everybody, Susan Storm here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the cognitive function called introverted sensing, and I'm going to be joined by Denzel Mensah in just a little bit. He's running just a little bit late, and we are excited to get into what introverted sensing even is and how it shows up for sensing judging personality types. Or if you're a different personality type and you have a question about how introverted sensing might show up for you, feel free to leave that question in the comments. This is a live interactive session. We want to hear your questions. I want to be able to know what you think about this cognitive function because it's so interesting, and having an insight about how your mind works can really help you in everyday life and in your relationships. So if you have a question, please leave that in the comments. Denzel and I are here and we want to be able to help you with that. Again, Denzel will be here in a little bit. I guess I shouldn't have said we're both here, but he'll be here soon. So yeah, if you're here and you can hear me all right, and just go ahead and say hello. If you have a question, you can leave that at any point. A lot of times we will get to the questions at the end of the stream so that we can cover all the basics and then dig deep into whatever questions you have. And I see Cutthroat Beast here. Hello. And you said it's your inferior function. So this should be a lot of fun. We'll talk about introverted sensing in the inferior position, which is if you are an ENFP or an ENTP, then you have introverted sensing in your function stack, but it's in the inferior position. So it can be kind of your Achilles heel at times. And Denzel Mensah just hopped on, so I'm going to add him to our stream. Hello, Denzel.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Doing all right. How about you?
Doing great. I'm excited for today's session. I was just telling Cutthroat Beast, our loyal viewer, I was just telling him that he says introverted sensing is his inferior function. So I think we should definitely make a point to get into that today.
For sure. Absolutely. I agree.
And hello, Caleb. It's good to have an ISTJ tuning in. You can maybe comment with your experiences of introverted sensing. Let us know if you're relating to what we're talking about or if you have any questions. If you have just started watching our streams and you're not sure who we are or you want some more information, my name is Susan Storm. I'm the founder of a website called psychologyjunkie.com. This website has over 1,000 articles on Myers-Briggs personality types and Enneagram personality types. And Denzel Mensah, can you let people know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Denzel Mensah. I'm an ENFJ 911 social sexual. I'm a life, personal development, and relationship coach. And yeah, I just love being able to use typology to better understand myself and other people, and then better my relationship with other people, as well as help other people better their relationship with themselves and others. I'm all about relationships and maximizing them. So I think that's pretty on brand for an ENFJ.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time with Denzel. We've taken trips together to Disney World, him and his wife, and me and my husband. And we spent a lot of time talking about relationships, and he's super insightful and really fun to talk to. All right, so let me go ahead and jump right into the presentation on introverted sensing. Let me just go ahead and pull that up. Just take a minute. Hi, Lilia. Nice to have you back again. It's nice to see some of the same names coming every week. All right, so introverted sensing is a perceiving function. That means it's a function we use to gather information. And perceiving functions help us to gather data, learn about the world, and become aware of specific things. So these are the types who value introverted sensing: ISFJs, ISTJs, ESFJs, ESTJs, INFPs, INTPs, ENFPs, and ENTPs. And of course, as you go higher up, like the higher on the list, the more you live and breathe introverted sensing. So ISFJs and ISTJs are the two types who have dominant introverted sensing. So these two types kind of swim in the world of introverted sensing, and you're probably going to see this function more overtly in this type, although because it's an introverted function, it's not always super evident on the outside. So let's go ahead and dive into what it is. Introverted sensing focuses on storing information, reviewing, and sustaining. Introverted sensing wants to experience a oneness with past traditions and memories that help to sustain cultures and communities into something long lasting and reliable. So, sensing judging types, they are really good at reviewing the past, recalling the past, noticing things that are different, and trying to create a sense of continuity and stability. Introverted sensing types long for stability, belonging, and a sense of order and continuity. Again, that's a little repetitive, but getting that out there. Because of this, they often are reliable and consistent. So these types, because they value stability so much, because they value follow through and dependability, they're likely to be the people who you can count on in the career or in relationships to be fairly consistent in their habits and fairly consistent and reliable in what they're going to do, because for them consistency is so important. Introverted sensing is greatly influenced by the past. So it is constantly comparing and contrasting what's happening now with vivid reflections from the past. Because of this, it notices patterns, spot differences, and considers whether the change is pleasing or not. One thing I've noticed about introverted sensing types is they'll be one of the first people to notice if someone's changed around the decorations in a room, or like where the furniture is, or if someone maybe changed their hair or something like that, because they're constantly filtering their current experiences through comparisons with the past. So they'll see those differences really, really quickly a lot of times. That doesn't mean that if something's not personally significant to them, they may not pay a lot of attention to it. But if it is, they'll notice those changes like really, really fast. And because they're sensors, they are aware of the concrete things around them, tangible things. And so they do tend to notice things like, oh, your couch was in the other side of the room the last time I was here, and now it's over here, or you changed the drapes in this room. So they'll notice things like that. So this is an example of introverted sensing. This was given to me by an ISFJ that I know. She said, every winter solstice, I take a walk in the woods. It was something my family did with me when I was a child. Every time, I wear a pair of cozy red mittens. I carry my grandparents' photos in my pocket. Every step that I take connects me with the steps I took with my mother, my father, and my grandmother and grandfather. Time stands still, and I'm threaded together as if by magic with my long past ancestors in this yearly ritual for a moment. For a moment, the impermanent feels permanent. So a lot of times when we're talking about introverted sensing, people can describe it in this way that sounds very almost boring. Like I've heard some people call it like the boring cognitive function. But when you actually get into it, there's nothing boring about it at all. In fact, introverted sensing types have this profound connection with the past, with their memories from the past, with rituals and traditions and routines that connect them to this kind of the timeless moments that meant the most to them. So in this example, this is an ISFJ who's talking about how every year at the winter solstice, she does this activity of walking through the woods. And each time it's like it was the year before, but she used to do it with her parents, she used to do it with her grandparents, and it's like she's connecting all of those, this long tapestry of relationships and meaning into this experience. So I think that this was a wonderful example of how introverted sensing can have a very incredible, profound, timeless, meaningful quality to it. I also want to say hello to DJ and Heather Cooper and Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacquelise. Thank you for being here. I'm going to pass the mic over to Denzel for a minute. What do you think about this example of introverted sensing? And have you seen anything similar from the introverted sensors you've worked with?
Yeah, no, I think that this is actually a really, really beautiful example of introverted sensing, like kind of having like retreading the same places that people who are dear to you have done, and it's creating that sense of like tradition in a way. Like whenever we hear that kind of things, like, yeah, my father came here when he was 15, and then I came here when I was 15, and now that you're 15, then you're coming here as my son, and hopefully your son will come here when you're 15. there's a beauty to it, like people, we like to kind of make tradition seem very like lame, but there's a real like deep beauty to it. Like, let's see how long like we can keep this chain, quote unquote, tradition of, you know, these men or women, whoever, like coming to this spot when they're 15 and having a great experience, like going, like that's something that only our lineage has, and we're preserving it in that way. I think that that's like there's a lot of meaning there, like, and that could transcend, like, whatever type that you are. But I do think that introverted sensing is what's responsible for stuff like that. And so yeah, I feel like this is just like a very interesting example. And it kind of like, well, I guess I'll save the rest of what I have to say for like maybe other examples. But yeah, this is great. I love this.
Thank you, Denzel. And I agree with you. I think a lot of times when a lot of type experts write about introverted sensing or talk about it, it's, we kind of condense the sensing functions down to this very shallow example of like, it's just the five senses. Or the SJ types are the ones who want everything clean and everything neat and perfect. And, there's so much more to it than that. And I think that that's something that I've worked really hard, and I think you have too, at trying to dispel this kind of really shallow interpretation of the sensing functions. And I think that this example is a really great example of how it can be so much more than that, how traditions can be so meaningful. And I had noticed a comment from Cutthroat Beast. He says, I noticed changes too. I'll put this up here. I notice changes too, and I sometimes use introverted sensing to predict the future from the past. I can use it well, even though it's not my primary focus, which is extroverted intuition. So if you're an ENFP or an ENTP, introverted sensing would be your inferior function. So it's not necessarily something that you're always giving a lot of credence to, but it's still there. You just might feel a lot more uncertainty with it than you do with intuition. But yes, introverted sensing, because it tracks patterns from the past, it can actually be very good at predicting how things go in the future based on how things have repeatedly gone in the past. It notices what patterns are dependable because they've been proven through the person's life experiences. A lot of people think that introverted intuition is the only kind of predicting function. And while it has a gift for prediction, introverted sensing can also have a really strong gift for prediction. In fact, Dario Nardi, who wrote the book Neuroscience of Personality, said that introverted sensing types show more brain activity in, I don't remember which part of the brain it was, but in the part of the brain that is in control of making predictions. And so sometime I will find the exact quote, but I don't have it with me right now. So there's an intelligence to introverted sensing as well. Introverted sensing cares about what is sustainable, long-lasting, and reliable. Its cautious nature and pragmatic way of thinking makes sure that life is stable, communities are upheld, and chaos is kept at bay. And there is a kid knocking on my door. 1 second. I'm going to pass it over to Denzel for just a minute.
Okay, so I guess what I'll say about this. Oh, okay, you got it?
Yeah, my husband got it. I didn't think he heard for a minute, and then he did.
Okay, I
So
didn't
go,
want to
but
come off
I
too
want to
much.
hear what you were gonna say though.
No. I was literally running simulations to see, okay, how can you say something meaningful but not talk too long before we get through the slides? So you got it. You go ahead. This is what
Well,
happened to me throwing NJ on the spot. It's like, oh, okay.
yes, I have 5 kids, and we do have a babysitter here most of the time that I'm doing it. But every once in a while, there's a knock on the door. So every once, it's just life as a parent. You're never completely, checked out of your job. So I actually see a really good comment here from Caleb, who I believe said he had ISTJ preferences. And he says, nothing gives me thrills like standing in the spot where something important happened long ago. And I think that's just a beautiful example of how meaningful introverted sensing can be and what it sees. like I noticed that when I'm with introverted sensing types and maybe we're driving through a town, maybe an older town, they'll notice these buildings and they'll be like, I wonder what that was like when it was invented. Like, I wonder when that building was constructed, it was probably this really big deal. And now it's like all broken down. Like, what was the history of that? And how did it get from there to here? And they notice things like that. And I think that's something that is really important, because without that, where would society be today if we didn't think about things like that, if we didn't carry on really important, meaningful traditions and routines?
Yeah, I
So,
remember that whenever Jamila and I would go to visit Joel and Antonia from Personality Hacker, they're both ENFP and ENTP. So introverted sensing is their inferior function. They love to like offer to their visitors, like, hey, do you want to go and like this? We're in Gettysburg. Do you want to see like where like the war happened and stuff like that? And it's always like interesting to them, like the types of people who are like, I don't care about that. And to them it's like, what, like history was made in this place. Like, so even as ENPs, maybe it's because they're also older, so now they have more rootedness in their SI, introverted sensing. But even as ENPs, they have a deep appreciation for like the history that happened in the land that they could like go and visit and like tread upon. But yeah, I know that for me, like, yeah, I was one of those people who, when I went there, I was like, I mean, if we did go, I wouldn't be like mad the whole time, but like, it's not going to be something that I choose to go and do. I'd rather just hang out over at your place and talk concepts all day and just connect. But I do see it come up more when I think well, we're not talking about me, but like for me, like when like here in Atlanta, we live about 10 minutes or less away from where Martin Luther King Jr. used to live, like the neighborhood that he grew up in. And they have like a whole exhibit and all of that. You can like actually go over to like the home, like the actual home that he like grew up in and everything, like take pictures there and stuff. And when I was there, I really firmly, like heavily look up to Martin Luther King Jr. I do believe that he was in the NFJ as well. And so being at the same area that he once not only once walked or once was, but like grew up at, like there is something that like, oh, even my SI that's not in my first four like hits me. But it's a lot harder for stuff like that to slip in through for me. Whereas like for if you have like SI like in your first four functions, and it's easier. Like I knew an ENFP who she dated someone, and then and like they broke up, and then years later she said that she was hanging out with somebody else, and she was in a perfume shop, and she smelled the same exact perfume that the old someone that her ex like pretty much like had, and she was like, whoa, like, and she like remembered that, and I think that she even, don't quote me, but I think that she even, yeah, I think she told me that she even went as far as to get the perfume so that she could like kind of like always have a piece of that ex with her in some way, like something to like always like remind her. And I was like, wow, like even back then I was like, wow, this is a very good sign, like very like interesting sign of like inferior introverted sensing, or just introverted sensing in general, like something that takes you back to that past, like connects you with that person in a way.
thank you, Denzel. Those are amazing examples. And I did notice while you're speaking that Caleb also said Gettysburg is pretty much number one on his bucket list of places to go. So that was really interesting. Um, And then there's a comment here from Heather, and I don't know if she wants to share it publicly, but she talked about a bereavement that she went through, and she said her dad built a beautiful desk that he used a lot. She said, I brought it home and set it up in my bedroom. I put my makeup on there now, and it feels happy for me. And I think that that's another wonderful example. It's like this things take on profound meaning. So for the SJ, it's not just a thing. The table's not just a table, the desk's not just a desk. It's like this is a symbol of that ties me to my father. And this, going to Gettysburg, it connects me with this incredible time, not incredible, this really sad and important time in history and all these things that happen there. So I think it's a really important function. And as far as the smell is concerned, if you're watching this and you're like, ooh, I'm like a NJ and I have that thing about smell, that's one thing. The smell receptors in your nose actually are, I might not be 100% accurate on this because I'm bad at recalling exact facts, but it's actually connected to the same part of your brain that stores emotion, I believe. And so, for anyone, if you smell something, you can have a really strong emotional response. I think it's also connected to the memory part of your brain. But again, forgive me if I'm not 100% specific on that. So smells are really powerful. I think they're really powerful for SJs, but if you're also maybe an NJ or a, I don't know, an SP, and you're like, wow, I feel really strongly about scents too. It can be because you're actually wired to smell certain things and have kind of an emotional reaction to it. Um, let's see here. So common features of introverted sensing focuses on the internal world. So last week we talked about extroverted sensing that focuses on the world outside. Introverted sensing is more inward focused. Experiences the present through comparisons with the past, which we've talked about. It has a high level of internal body awareness. So a lot of times I've noticed that with sensing judging types, they are highly aware of what they're feeling inside their bodies. As soon as they're sick, they know faster than anyone else would. As soon as they're thirsty, they've got to fix it right away. They're hungry, they need to eat right away. They're very aware of their body's signals. And I've noticed this in a lot of the books I've read about type as well. This inner focus on sensation can bring with it a strong inner awareness of what's going on in your body. Other features of introverted sensing uses previous experiences as a guide. So it tends to learn very quickly from mistakes, and it will take lessons from credible people or mentors and use those to guide the future. People who have lived through something, so they have a lived experience. That's what's really trusted. And it's energized by reliving special moments. So an SJ type who's trying to connect with someone might be like, hey, remember that time when we had our first date? And then they'll go into, let's like relive it by explaining it in detail. Like we met at your house and your dad came out and he was like this, and then we went to this movie and I still have the ticket stubs. Like that's a way that introverted sensing types can connect with other people, is by kind of replaying the past, by telling the story of the past, maybe by going back to a place where they had a significant moment with someone from the past, by bringing that story around again so that it's almost revisited in some way. So I think that that's one of the really powerful ways that SJ types connect with other people. And I think it's important to know that because I have an SJ parent and I have an NJ parent. And my SJ parent likes to do this, but the NJ parent is sometimes like, why are we talking about that? That was before. And so I think sometimes it's easy for maybe other types, particularly maybe the thinking types, who don't have introverted sensing, to be like, why are we rehashing the past? What does that have to do with anything that's happening right now? But it's actually super, super important for the sensing judging types. And I see we have a question from Pia. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that wrong. She says, is this why I seem to enjoy history and even more being physically in a place where significant things happen? And I'm going to say I have noticed that a lot of SJs are really into history. I've noticed some other types are too, because it's a way of like noticing patterns in, human behavior or patterns in war or all kinds of different things. But I've noticed specifically that introverted sensing types, I know like 2 introverted sensing history professors, and my brother is an ISTJ and he's really obsessed with history. So maybe there is something to that, but I don't have enough information to say absolutely 100% for sure. What about you, Denzel? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually very common for SJ types because history is essentially recording what happened. So if extroverted sensing is simply looking at what happened, like this is what's happening, that's what like extroverted sensing is doing. Introverted sensing is like, okay, now that we've saw what happened, we're post processing it and we're recording it. So the people who are like writing down what happened and they're like preserving that information, that's like introverted sensing at its best. And then from there, because introverted sensing, and I think in future streams we're going to talk about polarities, but I feel like you can't really talk about introverted sensing without the flip side coin of it, extroverted intuition. I won't go too much into that polarity, but that's where then extroverted intuition is able to spring from, because it's like, okay, now that we're looking at what things happen, like what happened in the past and how we've always done things, we can reinvent the wheel to be able to now see like what new ways we can do things. But in order to reinvent a wheel, you have to know how the wheel looked like or what the wheel was to begin with. So yeah, I think that's very like common for SJ types to really like enjoy history, and then also like being physically there, because it's just this feeling of like kind of like what I was describing even with Joel and Antonia. Even though they're not SJ types, they have introverted sensing in their immediate stack. It's like a feeling of like, wow, like I'm where history took place. Like that's a very interesting thing to experience. And then I see that Pia said that, I'm always reliving moments. As silly as this may sound, listening to you guys is giving me so many aha moments. See, that doesn't only happen to intuitive types. I don't know what type Pia is, but I'm assuming she's an SJ type, or he. We won't gender here, but but I'm assuming that they are an SJ type. And yeah, that's like, it's very common for SJ types like to do that. I think that also earlier Susan showed on a slide that I think one of the biggest important things to know about SI, or introverted sensing, is that it's looking for what's reliable, consistent, and verifiable. So one of the best ways that I could like describe this is like, yeah, Pia says that she's like an ISFJ. So let's just go with the most stereotypical ISFJ thing ever: baking cookies. If an ISFJ is hosting a Christmas party and she bakes Christmas cookies for the Christmas party, whatever, and she sees her FE then sees that, oh, everybody loves the Christmas cookies and everything, then the ISFJ is gonna be like, okay, because everybody loved it, then next year, because Christmas happens every year, I'm going to make the exact same Christmas cookies in the exact same way. Because if everybody loved it this year, then maybe next year they'll also love it, and then the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, and then that's when it becomes like a tradition. And then that's when it's like, extrovert intuition might try to come in, but why don't you change it up a little bit? But then introverted sensing might be like, no, 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 we have to preserve how we've done it, because changing it up is too much of a risk. So introverted sensing is like very safe. It likes to preserve. It likes to repeat. It likes things to be able to be repeated. Like if you ever want something that's, if you ever want to know how to do something that's for sure going to go right, then you can ask somebody who has introverted sensing, because they're the types to be like, yeah, no, I've seen this done 1,000 times in that exact same way. So I can guarantee you that if you do this for the 1,000th time, it's going to happen exactly like this if you don't change anything about it. And of course, sometimes that can be unhealthy for certain types of things that are like, hey, it's time that we update. But if it's not broke, then don't fix it, which is the introverted sensing mantra. Like, yeah, no, like this system works, or this cookie, like these cookies have worked for the past 5-10 years. So why are you telling me now to add sprinkles to it when everybody loves it even 10 years later? So that's kind of how introverted sensing works. It's really like looking at consistency, what has been reliable. That way it can guarantee the results that it's trying to get. And I'm glad that it resonates, Pia. Like that's her for sure.
Isn't that awesome? I love being able to talk about type. My favorite thing about type is being able to share about it and have someone connect with it and have it be helpful for them. It's so satisfying. And then Caleb commented also, he's an ISTJ, and he says, 100%, I will always go with tried and true over new and exciting. And yeah, I just love hearing from these ISJs, or if you're, I just love hearing from you guys in the comments. So it's great to hear what you think. And Jacqueline, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Jacqueline says, is that the deja vu moments? And I actually have this book right next to me, which is building blocks of personality type, and there's a section that talks about what it's like on the inside. And there's a section in here, and I'm not going to look through all the pages, but it says something like it kind of feels like deja vu a lot of times, because you're like, wait, I've had this before, and what's different about it this time? So I think there is an element of that to it. Now we got some quotes about introverted sensing from the leaders in type. I always start with Isabel Briggs Myers. She's I know I always say this, the mother of Myers-Briggs typology. And she says, introverted sensing types are made remarkably dependable by their combination of preferences. They use their favorite process, sensing, in their inner life, and they base their ideas on a deep, solid accumulation of stored impressions, which gives them some almost unshakable ideas. Then they use their preferred kind of judgment, either thinking or feeling, to run their outer life. Thus, they have a complete, realistic, practical respect both for the facts and for whatever responsibilities these facts create. We move on to Linda Behrens, who is a psychologist who has written many books about type. She says, with introverted sensing, there's often a great attention to detail and getting a clear picture of goals and objectives and what is to happen. There can be a oneness with ageless customs that helps sustain civilization and culture and protect what is known and long-lasting, even while what is reliable changes. And this, again, speaks to that, the oneness with ageless customs. This brings us to preserving traditions, and not just any tradition, but a tradition that has a powerful impact that creates a long-lasting stability. And then Dario Nardi, who is a neuroscience expert, he wrote, cautious protecting, that's his name for introverted sensing, is the bedrock of every society's traditions and the storehouse of our personal histories. Cautious protecting means stabilize with a predictable standard. Just as excited brainstorming, which is extroverted intuition, enjoys chasing after novelty, this process focuses on ensuring long-term prosperity. So introverted sensing is focused on, what can we do to make our lives stable and consistent for the long term, not just for the moment, but forever. And it functions really well at creating a sense of, I think, home and hearth for a lot of ISJs. They're really good at preserving the home and preserving their sense of community, because as long as they have that, their community, their home, their stability, then whatever comes in from the outside, they're protected by that to a degree. One thing that I've noticed just in my own life, I have a SJ child who's 9 years old. At least I'm 99% sure he's SJ. And then I have an NP daughter. And when we travel, the NP daughter is like, this is awesome. Everything's new. Our schedules are all thrown off. Everything's unpredictable. And she's at her best. She's never been more well-behaved in her life. And the SJ son at that point is really stressed out. He's having fun. He enjoys the vacation, but he's kind of extra stressed. He's a little bit more irritable. He's less behaved just because he's more stressed, because things are different. His routines are different. His habits are different. He's not at home. He doesn't have the same blanket. He doesn't have the same. And so this creates stress. So I've noticed at home, when things are very predictable, the NP acts out more and the SJ is very well behaved. And then when you travel and things are unpredictable, the NP is like the perfect little girl and the SJ is having a harder time. And it just goes to show that we all need different things. For an NP, they need to have experiences to be able to go out and just try new things and have life be unpredictable and different and surprising. And for SJs who have introverted sensing higher, they really need to have a sense of security, a sense of this is home, and at this time I get to go to bed in my comfortable bed and have these little routines that make them feel peaceful. So then I noticed there's also a comment from Cutthroat Beast. He says, or she, I experience deja vu occasionally, most likely through a dream. I see future experiences or events for a short period and forget all about it until it happens, and then I'll remember it. That's really interesting. I don't know which functions that's entirely tied to. Denzel, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I always associated deja vu with NI, but I think that's only because it for me it works with NI. Like I have deja vu in the same sense where it's like I have a dream and then I will be experiencing a moment. Like it happened to me last week. A few months ago, I had a dream that a friend I had not seen in literally over 5 years. Me and her were sitting at a table and she was saying something very specific. And I think I even wrote down the dream in my dream journal. And then, months later, just 2 weeks ago, we actually like were sitting down and we were just talking. I forgot all about that dream or whatever. But then as she was saying whatever she was saying, then I was like, and she was like, "What happened?" And I was like, "I literally had a dream of you saying exactly this right over here, like all that." It's like, wow, that's very crazy. So yeah, I don't know. I like that's how I experience it. So I just dubbed it to NI, but I could also see how like it could be a SI and E thing as well.
I think, I think when you pay attention to patterns, which I think extroverted intuition, introverted sensing, and introverted intuition tend to do. I'm not trying to be a jerk to extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is amazing. It's not as pattern focused as much as it is engaged in the present. But I think anytime you're a person who is paying attention to patterns a lot, and then you're going to sometimes have the sense of like, I maybe in dreams or in real life, I'm sure this pattern's going to lead to this place. Like I wouldn't be surprised if this person sat down to have this conversation with me in this way, or if this thing happened in the future. And maybe just being someone who's tapped into patterns means that when the pattern actually comes to fruition, you're like, this is crazy, deja vu. I don't know, but I think that's a good example, Denzel. And I've definitely had these weird predictive dreams too. I don't know what that's about. It's just feel like I'm crazy when that's happening to me. Um, and then there's a couple of comments from SJs here. Caleb says, I love traveling, but not having a home base and a predictable schedule always adds stress for me. Yeah, I think in every SJ and NP, there's a need for a home base. Even the NPs kind of feel like they need it. But I've noticed that like younger NPs, it's like there's this part of them that just wants to live in a van or something and just travel all around and not have a home base and just go somewhere new every single day. But then as they get older, that inferior introverted sensing kind of bubbles up and they're like, actually, but maybe I do kind of need at least something to go back home to. And they start almost begrudgingly feeding that side of themselves. Like, I guess we better get a house and insurance, do these things. But it doesn't often give the same sense of pleasure and satisfaction to the NP as it does to the SJ, who just like, this is amazing. Now I've got my home base. Now I've got this foundation of stability. And then Heather says, I have to have a schedule and routine. I don't even like stopping for gas on the way home because it throws off my timeline. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great example too. We're going to move to some quotes. Oh, wait, no. Comparing and contrasting extroverted sensing and introverted sensing. We did this last week, but we can do it again this week. If you're watching and you're like, I don't know, am I an SJ? Am I an SP? I'm not really sure. Comparing and contrasting can help a little bit. So extroverted sensing, this is the function of sensing perceiving types, SP types. This function focuses primarily on the present moment, whereas introverted sensing compares present to past and notices changes. Extroverted sensing is always looking for opportunities for action, whereas introverted sensing is looking for stability and familiarity. It's not as action oriented. Yes, it can have moments of wanting to take action, but that's not its primary goal. Extroverted sensing craves novelty and newness, and again, introverted sensing is looking for stability and familiarity. Extroverted sensing sees things for what they are, whereas introverted sensing is, again, it's because of that comparing and contrasting things, it's filtering everything through this subjective impression of the past. It looks at what happened before and how it can be improved now. Extroverted sensing adapts and responds quickly. So if there's a surprise phone call or a ball being hurled someone's way, a sensing perceiving type, because they're totally tapped into the moment, is usually very quick to respond to that. Whereas an introverted sensing type, that function is more inwards. They're reflecting on things. They're not going to typically have as fast and responsive reactions as a sensing perceiver type. Obviously, there are exceptions. I never like to say, well, SPs are always going to have perfect reflexes and SJs are always going to be slower, because it's not, there's no absolutes that work all the time. I'm married to an ESTP and he trips and falls sometimes, just like anyone else, or, misses a ball when it's being thrown his way. But more often than not, he's got this down. He's pretty fast. Whereas sensing judging types are in their, especially if they're ISJs, are more in their heads. They're reflecting on things. They're thinking about their interpretation of what's happening now. And so there's just a little bit more lag between what's happening in the present and their reaction to it. And then I got a question from Pia. They ask, can you have some extroverted sensing traits? Even though you're an ISFJ, I know I do have some. And I would say absolutely. We all have all 8 functions. So I like to explain it as like your fingers, right? You have 10 fingers. Some fingers you might use more than others. Your pointer finger you use more than you use your pinky finger, right? But you still use them all, or left-handed or right-handed. I'm right-handed, so I use my right hand way more than I use my left hand, but I'm still using my left hand almost all the time when I'm up and about. So the same goes for cognitive functions. If you're an ISFJ, you still have extroverted sensing. It's just not a place where you feel necessarily as certain or confident as introverted sensing. And you can have moments where you're like, I just really want to give into this function because it's going to make me happy for a little bit of time, but using it and being tapped into it for a really prolonged time can feel really exhausting. And then there's a comment from Jared. He says, socionics shows introverted sensing as more about intaking surrounding sensory information than it does about memory. And yeah, socionics is a different typology system than Myers-Briggs. Some people are kind of like blend the two, but it doesn't exactly work because they do describe the functions differently. So I am not an expert on socionics, or I can't even pretend to be. I've read a couple books, but I couldn't really speak to that. But it's great to hear from people who do know it, to hear their interpretations of the functions. Do you have any thoughts on that, Denzel?
Yeah, so with socionics is always just an interesting thing to bring up in general. Um okay. I've found that this has been the case for a lot of ISJ types. So I think that this is something that is common with SI users in Myers-Briggs. However, I think that it's not really as it's not much of a pattern. It's not a consistent pattern that Myers-Briggs tend to like focus on. So yeah, I think that with that, the reason why, like, I know that, for example, memory is the nickname that Personality Hacker gave it. And the reason why they use memory is because it's not about having a great phenomenal memory, although there have been many SJs who tend to have a great memory, but it's more about remembering how they did something, kind of like the cookie thing that I said earlier. It's like, they're if you're looking for safety, if you're looking for something that's secure and consistent, then you want to remember how you did it. So they're going to remember that recipe. They're going to remember the place where their father and their grandfather and their great grandfather treaded. Because if you don't remember those things, then how are you supposed to relive them? How are you supposed to go back to that nostalgic past? How are you supposed to experience that? So yeah, that I think that that's more of what they mean by memory, and it's more like the things that SJs do remember. They tend to remember in very, very strong detail, like almost as if they're reliving the experience. And I do experience this even with like INFPs at times, like who have introverted sensing as a tertiary function. When I'm like profiling them, sometimes I'll ask to tell the difference between an ISFP and an INFP. One of the many ways that I distinguish, of course, it's not like a silver bullet, but I'll ask what's your relationship with nostalgia, and then I'll ask them like also like how frequently can they like revisit a time period in their mind and almost feel like they're reliving that experience. And a lot of INFPs, they're like, oh yeah, like I can remember it in this way. And it's almost like they enjoy it more in post processing, which is a very big thing for introverted sensing. And that's kind of like the memory part of it. Whereas like for extroverted sensing, like ISPs, it's like, no, I enjoyed it the most while I was there. And afterwards, it's like, yeah, no, that was cool, but I'm not like their memory or their cataloging or post processing of it is not going to stick there. I'm married to an ISFP. She's like, yeah, I don't remember like all the stuff that happened for our wedding and all of that, and she's not really interested in rewatching the whole wedding video over and over again, like her ESFJ sister, who has introverted sensing as an auxiliary function, constantly loves to do with her wedding. She isn't trying to like reminisce and remember all the times that Susan Storm has taken us to Disney. She's like, no, I'm just excited to go again and re-experience it. Whereas like an SI user, an introverted sensing user, they can be like, yeah, I remember when we went to Disney and this is how it smelled when we were at the Philharmonic and this, that. And they're really like, they're going into that memory process. But extroverted sensing is about like, no, this is what's happening now. And at the moment it's gone. And they're not working that hard to like post process it. So that's why it leans more toward the memory rather than like, just the surroundings of certain things. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I think that's amazing. I think that's exactly, yeah, it's not that SI types have like perfectly accurate recall. It's that they're tied to these specific memories and they like to revisit them and create these kind of long-standing traditions based on those memories and so many other things. And I know we're getting, I appreciate Jared commenting on socionics. I think, you're contrasting socionics with Myers-Briggs and, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on socionics. It's a different typology system than Myers-Briggs. So they're not going to agree with each other on everything. And so I couldn't really voice much in response to anything about socionics. But there are some really good socionics channels out there, like World Socionics is awesome. And I can't remember the rest, but there's some good socionics channels out there. So if you're interested in socionics or what Jared is talking about, be sure to check those out. This channel's Myers-Briggs, so we're not going into socionics here, but I did notice that Cutthroat Beast said, I only repeat an experience if I really enjoy it. And yeah, I think that ENPs, there is that they still have that tie to these creating these routines and these traditions and things like that, but it's less a constant, continual part of their life. So we've got some quotes next from some supposedly sensing judges. Now, I have never been able to type Augustus. I can't actually sit down with him and be like, let's have a type session. So I'm hesitantly typing him as SJ. But he has a quote that says, we must plan for our lasting preservation rather than for our temporary pleasure. And I think this speaks to the introverted sensing need to preserve, sustain, and create a consistent and stable foundation for life, rather than what extroverted sensing can be when it's unhealthy, which is more like living on impulse and living in the moment. Unhealthy extroverted sensing can be much more like, let's live for the now, whereas introverted sensing is more focused on preserving things long term. Healthy extroverted sensing isn't so impulsive that it's going to be reckless or anything like that. But next we move on to Peter Thiel. He's the founder of PayPal. No. I know this. No. He founded Google. I don't know. Last week we were talking about the founder of PayPal, and this week no, it's Twitter last week. Peter Thiel founded PayPal, I think. But I'm having a brain lapse here. He says, people always say you should live your life as if it were your last day. I think you should live your life as though it will go on forever, that every day is so good that you don't want it to end. I thought that was a beautiful quote. And I have noticed that perceivers tend to have more of a quality of live as though it's your last day. Like, let's enjoy the moment. Let's try something new. And SJs have a more long-term thought process on that. Anthony Hopkins, who a lot of people type as ISFJ, and I wasn't sure for a long time. I thought, wow, he doesn't seem ISFJ from any movies I've watched. But of course, people aren't themselves in movies. And then I started reading a bunch of his quotes, and I realized he really does sound like an ISFJ. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this quote is one that SJs might relate to. He says, I'm one of the slowest drivers on the road. I mosey along. If you're doing anything too fast, including living life too fast, that creates sudden death. If I have to be somewhere on time, I make sure I leave early enough. And I just thought, what a perfect example of introverted sensing. It's like, let's not move too fast here. Let's be careful and let's plan ahead. And then Christopher Walken also is typed as an ISJ. He says, I believe in saving money. I believe in having a house. I believe in keeping things clean. Slow and steady is a very good thing for me. It works for me. And I think that most SJ types will relate to that. There's a desire to just have the slow and steady, predictable, but also very safe and smart approach to life so that you have a strong and firm foundation in your life and a sense of safety and security. So those are all my slides on introverted sensing. And if you're watching and you have any specific questions about it, be sure to leave those in the comments because we'd love to be able to help with that. I see another comment from Jared. He says, Joyce Meng notes there's also FI memory, TI memory, and NI memory. And yeah, I think we all use memory. So I think like what Denzel was saying earlier is that it's not that SI types have more memory than other people do. They're just revisiting the memories over and over again and creating these traditions that are revolve around these specific memories. I do agree that like introverted feeling can be very nostalgic sometimes because it's got this emotional, deeply personal, significant memory that really affected the introverted feeling, that really impacted the identity of the person, the emotions of the person. And so they can have a really strong memory for these emotionally impactful experiences. I also think it's human to have, when you have an impactful experience, to be able to remember certain things. But then I think that, but then I've also talked to quite a few sensing perceivers. And they'll be like, oh, do you remember, I'm not sensing perceivers, intuitive judgers. And I'll be like, oh, do you remember this thing that happened? And they're like, I don't remember. I like get flashes of memories. They don't like replay them in their brain as frequently. What are your thoughts on that, Denzel?
Yeah. I think that it's all like, every function, every introverted function will have some form of memory, like TI memory would probably be like, oh, what was the coding to be able to do this or whatever, like how did I like arrive at this process of, being able to conclude this thing? Because remember, TI is an introverted, it's a judging function. So it's trying to make a decision. Whereas like SI is a perceiving function. So it's mainly just like taking in the information and just letting it be in the where, wherever it might be. FI is like trying to also make a decision as a judging function. So it's like it might remember like when it's like experience like some sort of like nostalgia just as a disembodied function. If it's not connected to SI or any other function and it's just there, then it's like, okay, yeah, like, oh, I remember that feeling and I wish I had that feeling again. But then SI is what brings the whole detail of the sensory experience, kind of like what you're saying. It's like, yeah, this is what caused the experience. Like when I was there and I was smelling all of this and boom, boom, boom. Yeah, it's like post-processing and logging it. And also like kind of like what I said with history, SE is this is what's happening. SI is like, okay, now we're recording what happened. So that could also be considered a sensory experience. And in the same sense too, Susan talked about like SI, like those Where's Waldo type of photos. Theoretically, they'd probably be the best at that. Because usually SI users are the ones who like they have a very sharp attention to detail. And so if you've moved something around in your house and they come in, they'll, oh, this wasn't here because they're tracking the break in the pattern. So I would say the SI is not necessarily like tracking pattern, it's tracking consistency, which could be looked at as a pattern, but it's looking for the break. Like, whoa, what changed? This cookie doesn't taste like how it tasted like for the past 10 years. What's different about that? And then NI like it has its own type of like memory as well, but it's not really remembering like how Susan's house looked like last time I came over and was like, oh, uh you've moved the couch. No, like, and I, for me, when I try to remember things, funny enough, like I'm usually remembering dreams that I had. I'm usually remembering like certain concepts that I've been reflecting on. But it's not really anything that's like more like concrete, like, oh yeah, my trip to Bermuda and all of the details about it. So yeah, I wouldn't like disagree. I don't know if Jared was trying to like say that just as like a in addition, or if it was like a, oh well, just so you know this. But yeah, I don't disagree with Jared. Like, yeah, SI is primarily about like, post processing and remembering sensory information, whereas SE doesn't care to remember it. But everybody can remember stuff, and each introverted function especially remembers a different realm of things.
Thank you, Denzel. I think you're absolutely right. And one example, since Disney World keeps coming up, is when I've taken a couple of SJ types to Disney World way in the past. They are so wrapped up in all the sentimentality of it. They're SFJs, but it's like, oh, the smell of Main Street, and I have to go on Small World again because that's the one I always did when I was a kid, and my grandmother went on that with me, and oh, I have to eat this corn dog from the specific place because that's just a tradition. I have to make sure I do that each time, and really absorbing all these meaningful details. I remember that smell from the last time. Don't you remember how this Pirates of the Caribbean ride smells? And they just like explode with all of these references to the past while they're there. And then I've done Disney World with Denzel and Jamila, who don't have introverted sensing in their core function stack. And even though we've been there before, they're not saying, oh my goodness, there's that smell that I smelled before, or there's that thing that was there before. They're just taking in what's happening now. Like Jamila will be taking in what's happening now as the sensing perceiver, and Denzel will be usually talking with me about these conceptual things, like, I don't know,
Yeah, it's
intimacy
like
and relationships, and what does that even mean, and like what are all the different like categories of friend, and we'll be talking about that completely oblivious to what's happening around us, maybe, and I think Jamila said for NJs it's like it has to smack you in the face for you to notice it a little bit. But if you go
yeah,
there with SJs, or if you're in an experience with an SJ type and it's an experience they're enjoying and they've had it before, they're going to be like, wow, this happened last time and this happened last time and I have to do this because I did this last time. And it's really kind of fun. It's just kind of fun to see them light up with all those past connections and things like that. So, and I think it's great, like the example that you gave, Denzel, about the Christmas cookies. Like, oh, I want to do this every year. I want to revisit this experience every year. I want to smell these exact smells. I want to feel these exact textures, and I want to create this sense of continuity and community through this experience of making Christmas cookies.
cool.
So I think that was like a great example.
Yeah, I think that you just explained all of that very well as well.
Yeah. If you're watching, if you have any other questions, be sure to let us know. We didn't really go into healthy versus unhealthy introverted sensing, so you can maybe quickly touch on that without going too deep. So healthy introverted sensing is everything we've been talking about. It's creating stability. It's being a dependable, reliable person that carries on reliable information from the past into the present and future. Healthy introverted sensing types, they can adapt with changes. They just need time to become familiar with changes and to see what's dependable in those situations. Healthy introverted sensing is usually very detail conscious. It's very cautious. It's very stable, and it has a good memory recall. Unhealthy introverted sensing is more stuck in this routine to where it isn't open to anything new. As an example, I knew someone who was an unhealthy ISTJ, and at a point in his life just kind of detached from the world around him and kind of just lived in his room and watched the same movies over and over and over again and ate the same foods over and over and over again. And it was very unhealthy, and he kind of cut himself off from external input or trying new things. And so sometimes that's what unhealthy introverted sensing can look like, is this unwillingness to bring new information in. The introverted sensing type is essentially stifling extroverted intuition. So they're not trying out new things. They're not going out in the world and taking in new information and trying out other possibilities and things like that. So they get kind of rigid or stuck in maybe an unhealthy routine. What do you think, Denzel? What are some ways that you've been able to contrast unhealthy introverted sensing from healthy introverted sensing?
Yeah, I see unhealthy introverted sensing as kind of like, well, I definitely agree with everything that you said. Like the most unhealthy introverted sensing is rigidity. Like it's like a very, very unnecessary firm hold on tradition. This is how we've always done it. Like that's very like unhealthy introverted sensing to me, is that not wanting to change, to being too fearful of trying to add more and to reinvent the wheel and stuff like that. Whereas healthy introverted sensing is open to having new experience so that it can add more to its introverted sensing, because things become introverted sensing pretty quickly. And like I said earlier, you can't really talk about introverted sensing too long without bringing in extroverted intuition. um, like Susan said, we won't go too deep, but extroverted intuition is what gives introverted sensing what it does. So it's like, if introverted sensing is like, ah, yes, I've watched people cross this river several times on those exact stepping stones, so I know the exact stepping stones that are the less slipperiest, and all of that. Then extroverted intuition is like, ah, stepping stones is so traditional and boring. Let's see if we can swing from that vine. And then introverted sensing is like, no, 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 but that's not safe. That's not safe. We don't know if that vine's gonna snap or whatever. But eventually it sees extroverted intuition swing with that same vine like 10 to 50 times. And then introverted sensing is watching, like, okay, it worked that time. It worked that time. It worked that time. Okay, fine. I guess now we know that stepping stones and the vine works. But then extrovert intuition's like, now the vine is boring. So let's see if there's a jetpack around. Like, and then it's like, oh no, but jetpacks are not safe. So the more that introverted sensing is open to the suggestions that extrovert intuition like throws it, and maybe it doesn't hop on board right away, but it's like, I've been using this same recipe for the past 10 years, but okay, you want to add a little bit of cinnamon? Let's try it. Let's try it on half of the cookies and let's see how that goes. That's not being as rigid. You're still having another half of the cookies still be exactly like how you did for the past 10 years. But then when you have other people, it's like, these ones taste even better than the past 10 years. Like, what did you do differently here? It's like, oh, I actually listened to extroverted intuition and I added a little bit of cinnamon. You like those more? Okay. And now that becomes the new tradition. So now it's no longer extroverted intuition. Now it's introverted sensing. So like now every year we're going to have cinnamon in the cookies. And then that's when extroverted intuition comes again. It's like, okay, now let's add some. And it just keeps on going like that. So in short, unhealthy introverted sensing is super, super rigidity and not being open to like anything new, anything novel. It's still focusing too much on how things have always been. Whereas healthy introverted sensing is like, we're still securing things. We're still like, trying to make sure that everything's consistent and safe and secure and reliable. But I'm open to your idea and we're not going to adopt it with open arms just yet. But we're okay. We'll see. We'll let it progressively make its way through in safe doses. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. Thank you for explaining that, because yeah, when we're with our inferior function, we don't tend to just go we don't tend to accept it like right away. It's like we feel a little bit of uncertainty around it, but it's good for us to let it in little bits at a time. Like, oh, maybe usually I make Taco Tuesday on Tuesday. Maybe this time I'll make a different kind of taco, like, or it could be something like, this person has a different background than I do. So that makes me feel maybe a little uncomfortable because it's not something I can rely on where that we're coming from the same page. But maybe I'll just listen to what they have to say. I'll just absorb this information and then reflect on it internally and then play with extrovert intuition, like the possibilities of what it's like to be this person or what it's like to have a different frame of mind. Okay, so Caleb has a comment. He says, one unhealthy effect I've felt is finding it difficult to enjoy anything outside me if I feel something inside is wrong. The inside sensing overwhelms all other inputs, especially when I'm alone. And I think that's something that's very true for introverted sensors as well as just introverts in general. I think it's the inside, you're primarily focused on your inner world. So if something inside of you is off, it can be super hard to still engage with the external world and to want to pursue your extroverted interactions when something in your dominant function is off. So I think that's a good example.
I think that's also a combination of introverted sensing with introverted feeling. I don't
Yes.
think that's as common, not that it's impossible, but I don't think that's as common for ISFJs, for example, who are working with introverted sensing and introverted thinking. But I have noticed with like people who are INFP and ISTJ, they actually do tend to like report certain things like that because that combination of introverted sensing and introverted feeling does create like a hypersensitivity to those internal sensations.
Yeah, and I'm an INTJ. I have INTJ preferences, and I can relate to that also. And yeah, if something in my introverted feeling is wrong, like I don't feel right about something inside, then I can still be productive, but I'm not happy. I'm not enjoying it. So I don't know if that's relatable, Caleb, but yeah, or even like one you mentioned, the inside sensing overwhelms you. I've noticed with SJs too, if there's something physically, like we were talking about inner body sensations at one point, and if there's something physically that's off, like maybe they're just getting a cold or they're tired or something like that. Because they're so aware of the inner body sensations, I think it almost impacts them more than I've seen with other types. Like for me, if I'm getting a cold or I'm tired, a lot of times there's this part of me that's like, I'm just going to push through and push through and push through. But I've noticed that with ISJs, I know it's like they have to honor that inner feeling and they have to resolve that inner feeling before they can move forward and keep going. And I don't think that's necessary. I think that's actually a good thing. So,
Yeah.
For the most part, I think that's a healthy sense of self-preservation. So I don't know if I'd say it was unhealthy, but yeah, it can be hard. It's hard to, as an introvert, to be like, I'm going to go do these external things and enjoy them when something feels off on the inside for sure.
And I will say on that note, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hop off because Jamila has a gig. I forgot to let you know about that in advance, Susan. Sorry, it's been a busy
No
day.
problem.
Yeah.
No problem. Go enjoy that. Tell Jamila good luck. I hope it goes amazing. I think we're just about done anyway. So if anyone wants coaching with Denzel, if you got to go, just go ahead and hop off whenever. I'm just going to tell them, if you ever want coaching with Denzel or if you ever want help finding your personality type, Denzel is an amazing person to talk to. And you can just find him at denzelmensa.com. The link is in the description of this video. And he is incredible for helping people figure out their type, even the most confusing situations where people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm an ISTJ or an ENFP or whatever. He's great at helping with that. So if you're watching and you want to fit in one last question before we go, I'm just going to give a couple more minutes to give you the opportunity to do that. Thank you, by the way, for sticking with me today. I am extremely tired today, so I've noticed my words are getting jumbled up as I'm talking. So I feel like everyone's been really patient as we tried to explain this cognitive function. Also, next week, we're going to be talking about extroverted intuition. So next Thursday, if you're available and you want to join up and learn about extroverted intuition, please be here. If you are a sensing judging type, you also have access to extroverted intuition. You also value extroverted intuition. And so it can be a really important function to understand about yourself. And then the week after, we're going to be going into introverted intuition. So if you're an NJ type and you've been waiting to find out when we're going to get to Introverted Intuition. That's going to be in 2 weeks. So thank you, Lilia, Caleb, Leslie, Mike, Cutthroat Beast, everyone who came today. You guys had amazing questions. It was super fun to be able to interact with you. And if you have a question and we end this before we get a chance to answer it, leave it in the comments and I'll try to get back and respond to that either today or tomorrow, because I do care about making sure you get the information you need. And again, join us next week so that we can talk about extroverted intuition. And if you'd like to know more about introverted sensing, you can also go to my website at psychologyjunkie.com. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye.